Good evening to all of you. On behalf of India International Center, I extend a warm welcome to all of you to this book discussion on the book Mandalas of Time, Poems by Professor Malashri Lal. To discuss this book, we have a very esteemed panel of speakers this evening. We have with us Ambassador Navtej Sarna, who is India's ambassador to the United States, High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, and ambassador to Israel. He also served as Secretary to Government of India and the Foreign Office spokesperson. His earlier diplomatic assignments were in Moscow, Warsaw, Thimphu, Tehran, Geneva, and Washington, D.C. His literary works include the novel The Exile and We Weren't Lovers Like That, the short story collection Winter Evenings, non-fiction works The Book of Nanak, Second Thoughts, and India's at Herod's Gate, as well as two translations, Zafarnama and Savage Harvest. His latest novel, which is doing very well, is Crimson Spring. A prolific columnist and commentator on foreign policy and literary matters, Ambassador Sarna contributes regularly to media platforms in India and abroad. Welcome, Mr. Sarna. We have with us Ms. Namita Gokhale, who is the author of 21 books, including 11 works of fiction and editor of numerous anthologies. Her acclaimed debut novel, Paro, Dreams of Passion, was published in 1984. Recent works of fiction include The Blind Matriarch and the play script Betrayed by Hope. The edited anthology Mystics and Skeptics, Searching Himalayan Masters, was published in 2023. She is co-founder and co-director of the Jaipur Literature Festival, and she has been recognized both for her writing and her commitment to multilingual Indian literature and cross-cultural literary dialogue. She received the prestigious First Centenary National Award for Literature in 2017 and was the Sahitya Academy Awardee for 2021. She has recently been honored with the Nilima Rani Sahitya Academy 2023. Welcome, Ms. Gokhale. Yeah. We also have with us Professor Sukrita Paul Kumar. She is a former fellow of the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, and has held the prestigious Aruna Asif Ali Chair at the University of Delhi. An honorary faculty at Corfu, Greece, she was resident poet at the International Writing Program in Iowa, USA. Her recent collections of poems are Salt and Pepper, which is part of the selected poems, Vanishing Words, and Dreamcatcher. Her poems have been translated into many languages. The latest ones are translated into Indian, Italian, and published in Rome. Her critical books include Narrating Partition and Conversations on Modernism. She has authored many books, including Speaking for Myself, Asian Women's Writings. Currently, she is the series co-editor of Writer in Context, volumes published by Routledge, UK and South Asia. She is the guest editor of Indian Literature, a journal published by Sahitya Academy. Welcome, Professor Kumar. Dr. Rao hasn't come. Yeah. Dr. K. Sreenivasarao, who is yet to come. There you are. Please come. So, a scholar, literary poet, and administrator with the experience of over 3 decades in several positions of literary management. Since February 2013, Dr. Rao has been the secretary of the Sahitya Academy, India's premier institution of letters. Dr. Rao has represented Sahitya Academy at many international platforms, including the General Assembly of Union Academique Internationale at Brussels, and has led literary delegations to many countries. A prolific writer, he has a number of books to his credit. Dr. Rao has been jury member in many important literary awards. Welcome, Dr. Rao. And finally, the person who has made us to assemble here today, the architect of this book, Professor Malashri Lal. Professor Rao is the former professor of English at University of Delhi, and former Dean, University of Delhi. She has authored and edited 17 books. These include In Search of Sita, Tagore and the Feminine, and Finding Radha. Betrayed by Hope, a play on the life of Michael Madhusudan Dutt, which was published in 2020. She co-authored this with, as I said, Namita Gokhale. This book received the Kalinga Fiction Award. Professor Lal's latest book is what is being discussed today, Mandalas of Time. She has received research and writing fellowships at Harvard University, Bellevue, and Newcastle. As senior consultant in the Ministry of Culture, Professor Lal has also been a jury member for International Book Awards. Among other recognitions, Professor Lal received the Maharani Gayatri Devi Award for Women's Excellence in 2022. She is currently convener English Advisory Board of the Sahitya Academy. With this brief introduction, may I request Ambassador Sarna to release the book and others to join her. No, I'll take. Thank you very much. I request Ambassador Sarna to take the session forward. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. And may I request everybody who's still looking for a seat to make this a nice baitak? Baith jaiye. There's enough place. And more chairs are coming by and by. It's an absolute pleasure to be here this evening and to be asked to start off this session for Professor Malashri Lal's latest book. And I must say that in several evenings where I have been in this room, I have never seen this room so full and with such distinguished company. And I think it all speaks to Professor Malashri Lal's standing not only as a poet, but as a friend and as a human being. So our compliments to her, firstly, on that. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the chairman is usually supposed to have the easiest job of saying a few words and passing it on to the real experts. And I'm very fortunate to have real experts like Namita Gokhale and Professor Sukrita Kumar on the panel, who will no doubt analyze the book in detail. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't usually analyze poetry in the same way that I don't analyze good wine, because too much analysis can kill poetry. Poetry is something which has to be felt, and good poetry is something which immediately evokes in the reader an emotion, an image, an experience, which is a strange mix of what the poet intended and what the reader reacts to, given his or her own lived experience. Now, in Mandalas of Time, there is a lot of good poetry, if you go by this, this very simplistic definition of mine. Because, like good wine, if you go through this book in 2 evenings, which is what I did, it leaves you with a sense of very gentle intoxication, which gradually builds up. And then you are left with this suffusion of beautiful images, sad images, evocative images, and very penetrating images. And to pull that off all in a slim volume of 70 odd poems, I think speaks volume to the talent that has been on display and not only for the first time. I will mention two or three aspects of this, if I may. One, of course, as Malashri says in her own introduction, that poetry has been my attempt to bridge disparate inheritances. And boy, does she have inheritances to bridge. I think, I think there are a very rich, very multifaceted inheritances. You have the inheritance of the music-drenched poetry of Bengal. You have the overarching shadow of Rabindranath Tagore. You have a very deep understanding of mythology and history. You have the oral traditions, the lived experience of Rajasthan. And I think one which possibly is not mentioned, but which I perceive, is the identity of being an academic of such long standing at the university, which gives her a particular critical eye, which gives her a perception which only somebody who is used to looking at things very closely will get, and then to put it into poetry. Now, to handle such multiple identities is not easy, and most of us get lost because you begin to wonder, what is home? Who am I? Where are my roots? But I think this multiple identities is also a great opportunity for the creative person, because these are fault lines which lead to conflict, which spell contradiction, and which can, in talented hands and with a talented mind, like we have with Professor Lal, burst into creativity. And again, I think there's a line which she writes somewhere, which I have it out here. It says, to how to merge these identities, the duality of belonging and non-belonging seems irrelevant. So she has reached that point. In the playground of living, the moment is eternity. And in that, I think a lot has been said. The other aspect of the collection which really hit me was actually the trigger of the collection, which was COVID, the pandemic. The fact that her long isolation, like most of us, led her, to a very heightened sense of perhaps loneliness, isolation, sadness, depression, and then almost a desperation to get the poetry out there and to translate this all into rhyme and music and a set of images. And I think this has left some of the most haunting poems in this collection come from COVID. I mean, there's a particular poem which really I loved. It said, it's about the night of Diwali and the goddess of Lakshmi, in which she describes a house which is dark on Diwali. And there's just one person inside, and he does not put on the lights. And the first line is, this evening, Goddess Lakshmi recalls those who are absent. And I think that's so true. Actually, Diwali is the joyous function, but it can be the saddest function. Because if a person is not there, temporarily or permanently, then the night of Diwali is the most awful night. And she really gets that out there, and it really hits you in the solar plexus. Similarly, the COVID poetry talks of the torture of the elderly, the forced isolation, the long walks of people with terrible word, migrants, who are people who are actually the underpinning of the cities, but were then sent out onto the streets. And there is a poem about a woman who gives birth on the road, and in an hour or two after that starts walking again. Now, this brought to mind, Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. Actually, it's a poem of that scale and that sort of vision and you can virtually see those lines coming out again and again of people desperately walking. Similarly, there is a lot of mythology which comes together in this collection. Lots of stories on which Malashri and Namita have also worked. The stories of Radha, stories of Krishna, stories of Sita. You have this haunting touch that the flute of Krishna is silent if there is no Radha. And and things like that. And there is history. There is Rani Padmini. There is Sheila Devi of Amber Fort. And another aspect which really touched me was the profusion of nature in these poems. I mean, she has given life to leaves, to birds, to flowers, to trees. And I mean, the most common flower which we all see around, I'll never see it again after reading these poems in the same way, which is the bougainvillea, you know. And she says so beautifully that it's actually thorns disguised as flowers, which is so true because it pushes away the gentle chameli, it pushes away the harshingar, and it sort of takes over the entire hedge. So there's a lot of beauty, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of hope in many ways in this collection, because there's hope in a fallen petal, there is hope in the green behind the autumn, and so on and so forth. I know there are people here who will analyze this in more critical terms, but these were my feelings which I got on going through your poems. Thank you for giving us this treasure, and my compliments on this tremendous achievement. Thank you. And may I now request Namita Gokhale to kindly say a few words. Yes.
How joyous to be here. But the festival director and me cannot help but say that those of you who are standing there might be comfortable on the floor here, leaning against those of you who do yogasans, that is, you can sit with your against the wall and be 100 times more comfortable than standing there. But yeah. So it's a joyous evening, and how joyous to have friends and goodwill across the city the way Mala does. People she has mentored, people she has taught, people she has learned from. So I just want to thank everybody here for giving me the chance to sit in this joyous circle. In her introduction, Bajavi Fraser describes Dr. Malashri Lal as a brilliant academic, critic, and writer, and in the past few years, as a secret poet who has emerged slowly out of her modest self to share her verse with the world. And that really is the feeling. She has been shy about this because I think it is the most private and vulnerable part of her that we are seeing through these poems. Mala is one of, as many of you may know, Mala is one of my oldest and my closest friends. And we share a relationship which lends itself to trust and to collaboration. I told her recently that she is my security blanket. So my reaction to her poetry comes from a different place. I'm searching for the reflections and secret facets of my friend, trying to get her to know her even better than I already do through these poems, which are so private in so many ways. We are all gathered here as friends of Mala, of her discipline, of her focus, her patience and generosity, also her creative imagination. But these poems take us into the landscape and terrain of Mala's inner life. Malashri's foreword speaks of what Navtej also mentioned, Navtej, dualities, multiplicities. She describes that as a part of these poems, and how poetry is her attempt to bridge disparate inheritances, which he talked about so feelingly. It begins with a tribute to the Bhopa tradition and to the Pabuji Ka Phad that so adequately defines the oral traditions of a home ground of Jaipur and of Rajasthan. She also invokes Calcutta and Shanti Niketan and Vishwabharati. We then move to her long academic career, this is in her foreword, at the English department in New Delhi, and her first book, The Law of the Threshold, Women Writers, which looked at the redefinition of Indian literature in so many terms. Mala has always been invested in the complex matrix of Indian languages and their interconnections. We have done books together, 3 anthologies on aspects of myth, a play on Michael Madhusudan Dutt, and other ongoing adventures. In the pandemic years, the enforced isolation spurred her poetry, to which this collection of 75 poems stands testimony. Of these 75 poems, I will talk of 7 poems. I won't read them out, but I will just mention them and the groups of poems and narratives that emerge out of them, because I feel a sense of communion with these poems. To begin at the end, always a good way to begin, we have the last poem in the collection, which is called Easter Lilies in an Empty House, which is on page 108. Easter is always a time of renewal, of resurrection. And the silence of the garden where, and I'm quoting, the owners are alive only in obituaries, is offset by, and again I'm quoting a line or two from the poem, the supple leaves, flat and curved, that cradle the flowers that have no other family. And then she says, but some do, maybe 3 lilies in a stem, but they squabble like siblings, pushing for space. So I found this poem full of generosity and acceptance and a dash of sly humor. I'm not going to keep interrupting my few comments here, but I would at this stage like Mala to comment on why this was your choice for the last poem in the anthology, because I'm genuinely curious why you chose this.
Well, thank you for that question, Namita. As Navtej also said, that I do believe that there is hope. So that's why it's there, because the bulbs are underground, not visible. It's an empty house. Nevertheless, there will be a spring and renewal and another Easter.
Thank you. We all need a dose of hope these days. And then the second poem I was talking about is called Bellagio, Italy. And Mala and I went on a residency together to work on our Sita book. Which year was that? I think perhaps February 2006, a long time ago. Was it 6, 7, something like that? We had a magical time, Mala and I and Roby, the gallant Roby, always there with his camera and to help us when we stumbled up the hill. And yeah, so we had the most magical time there. And I'll give you a little background here that, we are both mythologizers and we can't keep away from Dhoop Batti, Agarbatti, Hasi Mazak, Zara Puja Path. So this was the old Villa Sabolini, and it was at a place where the 2 lakes met in Lake Como. Our old villa was there, which was from Roman times. And so I was just looking it up, and there was so much about Bellissima, the lady of the river, and who had so many other mythological connections, which somehow even ended up into Indian mythology in some branching ways. So we said, let's do a little invocation to Bellissima. So we took the whole group of people there. I don't know where we found some dhoop batti. I lit some dhoop batti. We ate some chocolates, and we said it's very sort of basic puja, and we said sort of Jai Bellissima kind of thing. And they invoked, because it was like one of those old Apollo groves or something. There was something so magical about it. We didn't know who or what we were praying to, but we were invoking some divine beauty of the river, of the hill, of the flowers, of the plants. There was also some cavernous, secret sort of old building there. So this poem I feel very, as I said, invested in. And I'll quote a line or two from there. Bellasima's Shrine and Sita's Exile, because we were working on our Sita anthology. Bellasima's Shrine and Sita's Exile met strangely on the hilltop of an ancient manor house, Villa Serbolini Bellagio, overlooking Lake Como. How did I come here? Asked the prisoner of Ashoka One. Because Sita was also wondering what she's doing there in these distant climes. A goddess lives beyond time and geography, said the deity of the lake, remembering hoary Roman times. Celtic chalices of stone and water from secret wells. And really, ancient mythology has the same motifs, the same figures. They may have different names, but they have the same strengths and sometimes the same human weaknesses. So, to move on, we also have to Sita and the Pandemic on page 73, where she says, during pandemic times, she wrote, the world today is that Ashok Vatika. In a way, we all were in our individual Ashok Vatikas at that time, you know. Then there's another Sita poem, two more Sita poems. Sita has already appeared earlier on because we are going backwards through the poems. There was Sita's Pankha and Sita's Rasoi. And Mala, in her book, in her essay on Sita, has spoken at great length about Sita's laddus and a kavua and Ravan and so many things. So obviously Sita's Rasoi is very clear to her. She can see it, and I love that essay, that poem. And I will leave it to the reader to discover the interlinkages and metaphors that the figure of Sita carries through all these pages. And then there is what, again, you mentioned, there is Radha's flute and Radha's dilemma. Perhaps the most moving and poignant of these poems, deriving inspirations from our joint tribute to the goddess in our co-edited anthology, Finding Radha, The Quest for Love. There are many threads that run through these poems, many strands, many synergies, and that come together to create a very fluid tapestry, a moving tapestry. It's words on water, really. It is a collection to be read slowly, to be relished, and to be reread. So thank you, Mala, for allowing us to enter your world, for drawing that curtain, letting us peep in, and thank you for being you. Thank you.
Thank you, Namita, for that lovely personalized tribute. And may I request Professor Sukrita Paul Kumar to kindly make her intervention.
I feel very hesitant talking about Mala's poetry because I don't know her and I don't know her poetry. Simple as that. Why do I say that? Because she's really a secret poet. Has been concealing that fact forever from me. She's supposed to be my good friend, you know, and I want to quarrel with you. I never took it seriously when she told me that she's got published in some anthology, or she may not even tell me actually. But I would find her suddenly and I didn't take her seriously as a poet till this book happened. And when you gave me the book, the first instinct that I had was, oh my God, it must be a very critical sounding poems, you know, with cerebral thoughts and, you know, because she is a very good critic. And can a critic write poetry? So I was prejudiced. And I was definitely thinking of how not to analyze, and that's what I'm going to do, not analyze, but just talk about my experiential response to the poems. And some of the things have been said already, and particularly about that secret poet kind of thing, which I think I would like to highlight because Mala, to many of us, and to me in particular, never appeared to be. Of course, we have enjoyed the animals of Africa together. We have traveled to Kenya together. We've gone for safaris and things like that, and also to Chamba and, you know, doing some of our books together, but not at all from the point of view of what would be the result, not a creative novel or a short story or something, but just our talking about it and doing some novel, creative, critical work. I think it was creative enough. I think it was path-breaking, some of the things that we did. But poetry? No, I never thought of that. So when this happened, and I was kind of, and I do believe that in each one of us, there is in some secret corner a poet lying dormantly. And sometimes that needs to be triggered, that needs to be punctured, or rather, that secrecy has to be, like you use the term poshak and parda. So, that poshak and parda, I think one has to face the naked truth as it is, which is actually facing the poet in yourself. You need to be courageous for that. Just the fact that you are a poet, because a poet is not going to tell a lie. A poet has to have the courage, first and foremost, to face some truth. And the image of Mala to most of us is very beautifully dressed, a beautiful lady, who is got a pin perhaps, not having, she does not need to have a pin on the sari, but it's always in place. Everything is in place. Most unlike what I am, nothing is ever in place, right? Till I became really old and I have these curls, which I didn't get them organized, but they seem to fall in place, I think. But what I'm trying to say is that the poems that you see have actually come out of that secret corner. And she doesn't realize she's telling us the truth about her life. She doesn't know. Because it's come so spontaneously. It's become unaffectedly. When I am looking at the poems, I know a lot of Mala otherwise, her life and she. And I think we have shared a lot of our own little secrets, thinking that we were being private, not realizing that she was diarizing it in the form of poetry. And it's out there for everyone to see, So I am looking at all this, whether it is, see, from right from the beginning, Ardhanarishwar. And many times we have talked about it. We have discussed it because I remember I was discussing with her my very first, actually my PhD thesis, which was on androgyny. And we would touch that point but not go deep enough. We just go around it. And the first poem is Ardhanarishwar, right? So these ideas have been working in her in a creative fashion without having to deal with it in a critical essay, right? Which is what has retained your creativity and your expression in a wonderful way. And somewhere you're quoting, I think, Audre Lorde at some point, where you're talking about how poetry actually is not a matter of luxury. Don't we know that? Isn't that true? I mean, many people who don't write poetry and who are outside of the circle of even enjoying poetry, they might think that it is like a matter of luxury. जैसे मुशायरा में जैसे आप उर्दू बोलने लगते हैं तो वाह 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 वाह. Do you understand it or not? Doesn't matter. I say your shlok bolega, so there would be a kind of a rhythm, but you wouldn't go beyond it, right? But imagine people who have put that together. Same is true of a poem in English. There's a lot of labor, perseverance that goes even to get the impact of a spontaneous poem. There's a lot of self-reflexivity and work on that poem. Even if it is not work on the computer or diary or something, but the point of fact is that it's 90% and more of perspiration, or what did he say, Einstein? 1% of inspiration and 99% of perspiration. That's true, but that 99% may be inside you, the process of editing. And for it to look spontaneous, many of them do have that artfulness which conceals art, That is the beauty. And art lies, don't we know, as teachers, many of us are teachers of English, and we know that art lies in concealing art, right? So I think that's something so beautiful. I want to read this poem called Blue Haze. Just 5 lines, but I want to read it. In the blue haze of anesthesia, I found your cool palm soothing my forehead, I looked beyond for a face and saw nothing or everything. Now, the poem culminates to this nothing or everything. And I remember Hazari Prasad Dwivedi and subsequently Namvar Singh talking about how, even if it's a very long poem, poetry rests itself in a couple of lines maybe. The rest of it is preparing one for it, right? And if it happens in a short one, it comes hitting at you. And you don't want to read the poem after that because it's so full. I love this poem. So similarly, there are other poems. And the facade, which shall I put it, like Mala's facade of the appearance, like that, properness. And you scratch the surface and there is chaos of creativity inside. Because if the chaos were not to be there, poetry would not happen. Because poetry is actually sorting that out to create more chaos. That's the irony. When the poem gets completed, you feel it at that moment is completed, but I'm sure it unruffles the depth of your being, right? Those feathers are unruffled. And you have to stay with it for so long to be able to settle. So it's a process, cyclic process. Unsettled, settle, and then unsettle again. And then perhaps settle again. So it just goes on like that, the writing process. So the whole life is actually one whole poem. And all these poems put together is that life, So whether you see mythological figures who fed your imagination, or you see nature and Amrita's laburnum, out there, or bougainvillea, or a poem that is called Homeless. A person who has 3 or 4 or 5 homes, I'm jealous of her always. She has wonderful homes and she's very, very, very well kept homes. And yet she's writing a poem on homeless. Even if it is based on somebody else, I don't care. But you were the homeless at that time when you wrote that poem. And to unravel that self, I'm not going to read it, but buy the book and have a look at it. Have a look at that poem. It's crying. It's kind of therapy of, after crying, there is therapy, there is purity, so experiential. I can go on and on. And the chairperson is very coolly, oh my God. That's away. Okay. So I just basically want to wind up all this because it's like my response, which is equally emotional, I think, because as I don't want to analyze, that's why. So there are contradictions constantly within the poem. Even if you forget about the poet and the poem is a contradiction in itself. So there are intrigues of various kinds that you see here. And it is this intrigue, creative intrigue, that goes into taking us into a creative journey and discovering our own poetry from within this so-called subjective. And in that, it is confessional. And we know about what confessional poetry can be. We have examples in Anne Sexton, Sylvia Plath, and we have examples in our own Kamala Das, and now Mala. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sukrita, and we would have gone on listening to you, but we do have Dr. K. Sreenivasarao with us, and I do know that he has another appointment, so I'm going to ask him to kindly speak. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Ambassador Navtej Sarna and Namita Gokhale ji, Sukrita Paul Kumar ji, and today's star, Professor Malashri Lal. In Hindi we call it as a Utsav Murti. Aaj ka Utsav Murti. Before going further, let me greet all of you a very happy Teachers' Day, because I know I could see all of you are teachers one way or the other. including, of course, Malashri Lal, herself a teacher throughout her life. Yeah, poetry is the soul of India. Some may think that is an exaggeration. However, when one looks closely the annals of history, it would be undeniable and unmistakable fact that poetry has filled every inch of the Indian subcontinent from time immemorial. From the time of Vedas till today, there has never been a time or region in which poetry creation has not taken place. In addition to the uninterrupted creation of poems and songs, for thousands of years, the number of languages and dialects in which this process has been taking place makes India a unique poetry destination for everyone in the world. Again, this is not an overstatement but a fact, and people can count the number of languages and dialects in which poetry creation has been taking place and then compare with any other land, and one would realize that this is an undeniable fact. India is the land of poetry. Coming to the book at hand, it is a lovely collection of poems that are splendid mixture of personal experiences, imagination, deft usage of very apt imageries, description of flora of the land, and philosophical insight. It is not very often do we come across such an eclectic mix of all the above and with heavy cultural blend. The benefactors of this are readers, and we all have nothing but to say thank you to Professor Malashri Lal. My understanding is, I may be wrong, Professor Malashri Lal has been writing poems every now and then, but this is her first collection of poems, and it is a splendid collection of poems that are not long nor are they short, but instead of right length so as not to bore the readers but sufficient to trigger curiosity of the readers and ignite creative juices in them. I'm not a poet that you all of know, but you introduced me as a poet, but I'm not. And I just would like to share some of my thoughts as a layperson of this collection of poems. And I believe thoughts of laypersons are as important as those of the literary critic. Hence, apart from what is contained in the foreword and afterword to the book, I would like to add following thoughts of mine. I do not know whether time is linear or cyclical, but Professor Malashri Lal has brought out cyclical nature of time, and the title is very fitting for this. It is not obvious but very subtle, much like eternal recurrence of Nietzsche's or demonstration using Hanuman in the Ananda Ramayana. One can easily spot the deep observations of Professor Malashri Lal in the book, but what is more important, how the poem after poem demand attention and observation of the readers. It is not obvious at this first glance, but the themes of poems in the volume are deeply connected, and the ability of poems to command the attention of the readers is the proof of success of this collection. Poet is someone who can see beyond the given. That is why, in the days of yore, Kavis are called as drishtas. The seers indicating poets had ability to see beyond the given. I don't know why the nomenclature was discontinued, but these poems amply demonstrate the power of the poet to see beyond the phenomena and also capacity to take the readers to the world of phenomena. For example, in the poem Autumn, Professor Malashri Lal lines up life, as we all know, through mundane, dreary moments mixed with euphoria and travails, birth and death, and illustrate these components of human existence through the season and the falling leaves. She ends the poem with the line, "The drama of autumn leaves enacted annually." One is the power of this line, but the 15 lines in the poem highlight not only the sensitivity of the poet, but also her ability to see beyond the mundane reality and also to connect the dots that obviously misses the ordinary people. Jitu Krishnamurti once observed that truth is not only a pathless land but can be found only in everyday occurrences of life and in relationship. How one is relating one to the things around oneself and also to oneself. In the poem Afternoon Serenade, the poet provides a reflective insight into what everyone goes through in daily life but do not observe sufficiently. The lost souls in the poem should not be understood in the sense of schemel seelen that Nietzsche described in Gay Science, but as ourselves who go through motions without enough reflection. Like this, all the poems in the volume are full of insights and philosophical in nature. So I can give out illustrations from all the poems in the book. My hearty congratulations to Professor Malashri Lal and Hawakal Publishers for bringing out this book that is much needed at this hour, that propels the readers to reflect. On that reflection, everyone is bound to trace certain component of cultural root. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sreenivasarao. And now, the piece de resistance of the evening, Professor Malashri Lal herself.
Good evening, everyone. It's just so generous of the speakers to have expressed appreciation for my poetry. They've all been good friends for a long time. And to see all of you here in the audience filling up the room is the most heartwarming experience for a teacher on Teacher's Day. So thank you ever so much, everyone, for being here. Quite often, my friends here on the speaking side of the room have talked about the vulnerability of the poems. And indeed, they had to be secret poems because they do show a kind of a fragility that I feel exists in life. And these are issues that one deals with over time. And one thing I would say that this is my debut volume of poems, because I believe that it's never too late to start something new. So I decided during the isolation of the COVID times that it's all right to be vulnerable. It's fine to pull out those little bits of paper here and there, to put one's emotions straight in front of everybody, and to have people read it, think about it, look into certain windows and certain closed doors of one's life and other people's life that one has observed, and to present it to the world. And although some of those poems were very difficult to write and even more difficult to put forward on the public platform, I think for me the very difficult moment was how to name the book. And then suddenly, as often happens, of creative writers in this room, many very experienced, and I have to say that it was just a moment of sudden realization that the only word that fitted was Mandalas of Time. Now, I'm not looking at it with any kind of spiritual singular tradition in mind at all, but it seemed to me that mandalas invites the idea of pools of consciousness. And when I looked over the material that I had in front of me in these 75 poems, they belong to different pools of my experience, my life, my identity, and my feelings. And it's just a bunch of emotions that happen over different ways in a non-linear fashion. So what I'm going to do is show you a couple of slides there which contain the poems, and I'll follow, and while the slides are showing, I will comment on some of these aspects of why it's mandalas and what I have struggled with. So Shila Devi of Ambir, as you can see here, it's from the Ambir temple. And the story is that Shila Devi was found by Raja Man Singh in Joshore in Bengal, which is now in Bangladesh. And then she appeared in a dream to Raja Man Singh and said, if you rescue me from this mud pool, and look after me and carry me with you to the sands of Rajasthan, I will bring you good luck. And that's how Shila Devi came to Rajasthan. And in a strange kind of a way, it seemed to me a journey that in a way I had made also. Because I grew up in Jaipur completely and absolutely. If anybody says, where is home? I'm going to say Jaipur. But I have lived with a pre-marriage surname, which was Mukherjee, which can be nothing but a Bengali. And I do read, write, and speak Bengali, but I do not identify with Bengal culturally. Culturally, I identify with Rajasthan. So I wrote this poem, and I'll just take you through this. Gilded silver doors encase me now with a retinue of priests who determine my hours of shayan, darshan, and bhog. I think of my freedoms in Joshur. In a marshy pit I lay hidden when Mansingh found me. As a black miracle stone, I travelled to golden Rajasthan. Honor, glory, wealth was mine. But what happened to my companions in the marsh? The dolorous fish, the raucous frogs, the earth-hugging worms, did they find adoration too? So my poems are typically short, and as one of my friends here pointed out, they often end with a question mark. Because for me, that question mark is important. I don't have answers, but these ideas, thoughts have come to me which have been turned into poetry on and off. Let's take the next one. And this is Radha's Flute. Now, as you all know, Namita and I have worked on two marvelous books which have to do with mythology. And the third one, Madhusudan Dutt's life, is also to do with mythology because he wrote Meghnad Bodhgabo. So, and somewhere Radha and Sita have seeped into my consciousness. But as the poem Ardhanarishwar that Sukrita just talked about also mentions, I'm fascinated by the idea of the Ardhanarishwar. And you can see the fusion of Radha and Krishna in this image also. Because, and Manjeet is sitting here, my lifelong belief in the equality of male and female members of the society has been the guiding force of my thinking. So whenever I've come upon mythological tales about that kind of equality, I am fascinated. So Radha's flute, in the book itself, I have asked the question in my essay that we know so much about Krishna's childhood, his upbringing. We know what happened to Krishna after he left Vrindavan. But what do we know about Radha's childhood? What do we know about Radha after Krishna left Vrindavan? And then I composed this short poem. Krishna flung the flute, discarding Vrindavan's idyllic pastoral of joyful dalliance. Kingship awaited him in Dwarka. Radha picked the reed, but it would never sing again. Loveless, ownerless, godless. The third one is about Sita in exile, and it's a poem that Namita referred to. But I'd like you to just see that image of Belisama. When we were at Bellagio, and that's the building that you see of this old manor house, it's a beautiful setting. But we lived in a community which had forgotten its Celtic inheritance. And Namita and I would often talk about this, that how fortunate we are in India that we live surrounded by our mythology. That there is revisiting, retelling, reinvention, all kinds of things. But it has been a continuous and emerging tradition. And in fact, rewriting and new versions have always been welcome. But here, when we were in Bellagio for a whole month, and we went scurrying over the hillside and saying, but there used to be a lot of old Celtic mythology. What happened to it all? And then Namita, being Namita, found this grotto-looking place, and we said, oh, something must have happened here. So we were, in fact, as visitors to that area, revisiting the mythology of the local people. Nobody had any memory of it all. And that is an image that I found of Bellissima. And then I wrote this poem that I'm not going to read it because Namita has already mentioned it. Okay, well, it's in front of you. So, Bellisima's shrine and Sita's exile. What attracted me is the similarity of the two figures. That they were strong women. They were women who have not always been recognized for the strength that they have. They met strangely on the hilltop of an ancient manor house, Villa Serbolini, as you see it there, Bellagio overlooking Lake Como. How did I come here? Asked the prisoner of Ashokavan. Was it the power of a writer's pen that propelled this journey? I had to put a question mark there because Namita and I had actually carried our manuscript of Sita and were hoping very much that in adjoining studies and rooms in that lovely manor house, we will be able to produce a book. Everything depended on that. So, was it the power of the writer's pen that propelled this journey? Then a goddess lives beyond time and geography, said the deity of the lake. So, of course, we would spend hours just looking on this beautiful lake and the beautiful hillside. It was month of February, I think. Remembering hoary Roman times. And then there's the Celtic chalice of stone and water from secret wells. And I'm actually delighted that we found their Celtic mythology for the locals. So let's move on to the next one. Yeah, this one is a personal and I don't want to call it a sad poem, I'd call it a reflective poem. This was when we were traveling abroad, Roby and we were with our family. And somehow at night I had my mother somewhere in an abstract form appearing in my dreams, and the next morning I wrote this. I hope you can read that on the screen. Dreaming of Ma by the sea. You live somewhere between the black night and the bright star, free of body and its temporal limits, in green leaves turning to red in a mellow autumn. I catch a glimpse of the Sari Palla on that day. You knew life was short and might become shorter. In the shimmer of an unsteady wave on the lake, I recall your tremulous smile when you whispered, trying a hopeless cure. In the rough-hewn rocks that line the harbor, I remember your will to fight an uneven battle with the rogue cells. Here, on shores unknown to you and me, we meet again. When the dark sky rests on the sparkle of stars, living and dying are no longer apart. So, I think Sukrita also mentioned that poetry has a therapeutic quality. And this was one of those poems where I had to express my sense of missing my mother, yet finding her. It was not a sad poem. It was actually the joy of some kind of a connectivity beyond ordinary living, and perhaps that environment of the water and the rocks and the blue sky brought it all into unison in the form of a poem. The next one By the way, I have to thank Usha Munshi for all that lovely animation. And Roby for putting those slides together. I don't know how to do all this technology. So this is the other end of the spectrum, and that's my feminist activism. When the long march home was happening in Delhi of, as Navtej mentioned, the terrible word, the migrant workers, I and some of my friends started saying, what about the woman migrant? She has a separate story from the male migrant. And there were things happening, and these are based on newspaper articles, and they're footnoted in the book. The woman's experience was a different one. It has to do with the body. Because when you're in public spaces, the female body in India becomes the object of a gaze and glare and commentary. And often it's a very awkward body to carry in public space. So this particular poem is called Lady Special. As you can see that it's an ironical twist to what compartments are often named. And it's the story of this woman who gives birth on Ratlam platform. Leave the slum or pay the rent. Who cares if she's pregnant? Get out. Go anywhere. The husband finds train tickets headed for a village she hardly knows. Will she find a home for the newborn Pooja's reverie is broken by the sure and sudden pain of birthing. Ladies special for women to be safe. Is she? Ratlam station. Steady hands lead her to the platform. Screened by women surrounding her, a kind lady doctor takes control. Pooja sees a puckered face squinting into the first light. This is home, she mutters wanly, among strangers who cut the cord and feed my newborn. And the last one is addressed to Rabindranath Tagore. Again, a poem about split identity, but I surely did not want to put the bearded Gurudev as the illustration for this poem. So these are the sands of Jaisalmer, but in an abstract form, and yet the poem is addressed to Rabindranath because, as the speakers have pointed out, so much of it is about belonging and non-belonging, but I've resolved it. I'm happy everywhere. So this is a poem to Rabindranath Tagore. Among the sands of a desert state, I heard and read your poems, Gurudev, distant yet close, familiar yet alien, while I struggled my identity, flitting between Rajasthan and Bengal, unable to claim either, unwilling to let go the language and legacy of my ancestors in Shantiniketan. Then I learned from Gurudev, emotions have no fixed language. The mind has no physical limits. Music resounds in the open sky. Dance is the joy of a spirit everywhere. So perhaps that's a good line on which to end because I can see Sonalji here. I beg your pardon if I've said anything wrong about dancing. But I really feel that the idea of dance is a very joyous and liberating one. And to carry that forward, writing this book, bringing it to all of you, bringing it to the public readership has been a very liberating experience. Thank you, everybody.
Well, we have a few minutes, and I'd be delighted if we could have 2 or 3 questions as a compromise, and this may come as a welcome surprise to everybody. I'm going to use the chair's privilege and cut out my concluding remarks. Because otherwise we have no time for Q&A. But if the questions run out, then I'd love to say something. We also have to have the publisher's vote of thanks. So please keep the questions very short, and seeing it's Sudeep, it'll probably be a short poem. Yes.
Just to point out, many congratulations, Mala. It's fantastic, really fantastic. I did know about The Secret for a long, long time, so I feel extremely privileged. Just, there's another secret, which is the title of the book itself is a secret code. It could have easily been The Mandalas of Love, because her entire demeanor, the words, and everything revolves around that 4-letter word. But she uses time as a coded word for love. So it could have been Mandalas of Love, because her love for words, her love for humanity, the love for secular living, and her love for essential creativity is there. So is that a code? Was that a code?
Okay, so we'll do it all round. Kindly, yes, I'd be grateful if you can make it a question and not a comment.
Oh, yes,
Thank
definitely.
Thank you.
Mala, is there a conscious reason for placing Ardhanarishwara as the very first poem in the collection? Because to me, it sounds like an invocation. What were the reasons which you had for making it the very first poem of the collection, which has several other poems referring to nature, God, and cyclical character of time?
Anyone else? We'll take one more together. Yes, please.
First of all, hearty congratulations to Professor Malashri Lal on this maiden volume of poems. And I'll make one or two observations and a short, quick question. That is,
Please do.
yeah,
The question.
okay. Well, my question is, while reading the poems, I felt that there is a feminist angle definitely, but I observed that the feminism that is there in the poems, it's not a firebrand feminism, but a very soft and firm variety of feminism. I could feel that from the poem Lessons from the Ganga. I could feel that from Rani Padmini today, from this poem. So, what would you like to say about that?
Yeah, I'm curious, is this really your first attempt at poetry? Were you writing poems when you were a little girl?
Right? I think we have them all. Please.
I'll just give a joint answer. Yes, it's my first volume of poems. And when it comes to interpreting whether it's love or love and time or why Ardhanarishwar or what kind of feminism, I think I'm going to take a page out of Sukrita's comment and say, everybody read the poem the way you like it.
And the others? Did you want to address all the other questions?
No, that's all of them.
All of them.
Yeah, the Ardhanarishwar, well, on the serious note, Ardhanarishwar is an important poem for me to begin with because I wanted to establish that idea of equality and the power of myth. That to me is very, very important. And then, as Namita mentioned, the last poem is Easter Lilies. So it does not refer to any one particular tradition. And it's not a feminist book in that sense of the word, but there's plenty about women in it.
So should I say a few words?
Yes, please.
But thank you very much. We still have a couple of minutes. So I'm going to just thank the other panelists for bringing together such a nice discussion on Malashri's poems. And I'm going to thank her firstly for that very lovely exposition and with giving us four of the most powerful poems that, Dreaming of Ma was something I wanted to also address, but I did not have time. And I'm so glad you have done it. What we saw from the comments, but firstly from Namita, is that it needs a Namita to get a lot of people to write. And she may be she's a great friend to many people, and I know she's a very special friend to Malashri. And Namita, if you have done a great service by ensuring that Malashri's secrets came out and not just...
There's a disclaimer, and I absolutely claim nothing here.
But there are friends and friends. So where Namita is a friend who is a co-mythologist, you have Sukrita as a friend who said she didn't know about Malashri's poetry. So there are different compartments of friendship, obviously, that all of us observe, but each one is valuable in its own way. And particularly the idea that we got in the discussion about the mythology, I think it's very, very unique because, to think of mythology as traveling, I think is a very, very, very new idea, which we got a perspective into today. And of places, I think we did not mention in the discussion, none of us did, some of the special places which I really love because I've been to most of them, that Malashri refers to, the places in Landore, the places in Shimla, and some, exquisite poems which we did not have time to touch, but please do read them. And Sukrita did mention the artfulness that goes behind art. The fact that there's a lot of hard work, there's a lot of craft in making something sound spontaneous. And if anybody says that, oh, I just, whisked off this book and I just did this, it's very difficult. I once asked a painter who I bought a painting from, I asked him, how long did it take you to make this painting? And he said, 20 years and 1 week. And I asked him, what does this mean? He says, 1 week to make this painting and 20 years to get to the point that I could make this in 1 week. So I think a lot of the poems come, and please read the craft behind the artfulness also without too much analysis. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for a wonderful evening. Professor Malashri Lal, our compliments again on this book, and now we look towards not the debut book. All right? And I think we have the vote of thanks by the publisher.
Good evening. So I think I have a minute or two. Sure, thank you. Congratulations, madam. Congratulations, Professor Malashri Lal, for this wonderful book, Mandalas of Time. So I have 3 major points to highlight. Hawakal Publishers is proud to have published both Professor Malashri Lal and Mandalas of Time. There is no comparison between the author and her book. Both are equally important to Hawakal, that has been publishing poetry for the past 15 years. Number 2, Hawakal is grateful for this opportunity. We are thankful to IIC, to all revered dignitaries here, and to the entire cast and crew of Hawakal family for making this book. And finally, dear audience, without you, no event can take place. We are eternally grateful for this magnificent crowd. Thank you from the core of my heart for your precious time. Thank you.
Can I, with your permission, just do a postscript? I brought little gifts from Jaipur, specially created for my wonderful speaker friends. May I give them to you? Yes. Please?
Oh, thank you, madam.
And one for Usha.
Thank you so much. Thank you, madam. Sure. Ma'am, this is your book. We have plenty with us.